following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
We are back. Michael Duca on Baseball and Life. I'm Ralph Tycho with the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. And here is the host, the man himself, Michael Duca. Good morning, sir.
Good morning to you. How are you this fine day, Ralph?
I cannot complain at all. Spring is sprung in Northern California. I know you're in Arizona on your spring training trip, so would you fill me in on what's going on in your life?
Well, a whole lot of baseball and a whole lot of driving is going on in my life. I seem to have won the spring training Mario Andretti prize, so I get to go out to the West Valley almost every day. And except for the weekends, that's pretty fun. The weekends down here in Arizona, I believe they passed a law about 8 years ago that says that it's against the law for any freeway to be allowed to be driven on unhindered. So they're busy tearing up and repairing something on the weekends all the time, which in my case closes about a 2-mile stretch of the freeway Saturdays and Sundays and helps me to enjoy the neighborhoods in lovely Phoenix.
Right. Now, you have a device on your vehicle, of course, that gets you to, directs you where to go, so you're not just lost when you get off the freeway. That's got to be impressive.
There's no shortage of people willing to tell me where to go, Ralph.
Go podcast, young man. There you go.
There you go.
Imagine what it would have been like without that, or just 10 years ago, they didn't have that device that gets you around. And,
well, I don't even have to imagine. I've been coming down here so long. I was here before the 101 loop was built. I was mentioning this to someone the other day. My wife and I went to the very first game ever played at both Scottsdale Stadium when it was renovated in 1992, I think it was. And we went to the first game ever played at Peoria, which was in 1993. And that first game in Peoria, we were staying fairly close to Old Town. We were up by Chaparral, for those who know the Scottsdale area, which is maybe a mile north of Old Town. And to get to Peoria Stadium in those days, you drove 12 miles north on Scottsdale Road, and in those days, there were parts of it that looked like they were about to turn into dirt. There were roads that turned off of it that were dirt roads. It was so undeveloped in the north end of Scottsdale at that time. Now it's 8 lanes all the way north. And when you got to Bell Road, you turned left and you drove 19 miles. 19 miles on a surface street that had signals about every 6 blocks and car washes about every 4, and very little else to recommend itself. It was a torturous trip. Now, you're surrounded by 5 lanes of traffic, and it's still a torturous trip. But it's a torturous trip where you're always, stopping and going randomly rather than at the lights. And when the freeway was built, they built all the sections between the exits first. But the overpasses at the exits were the last thing that they built. So you'd drive 2 miles on the freeway, and then you'd come to where there was going to be an exit, and you'd have to get off, go down, wait for the light to change, go back up the on-ramp, get back on the freeway. There were no overpasses, so there were nothing but exits.
Wow.
It's better now, although there's a million more cars down here.
Oh, can a case be made that the industry of spring training baseball helped build these cities up from the rural, desolate places they were that you describe? Is spring training baseball that big a draw and an industry that made these towns something more than just stops in the road?
Absolutely. Absolutely, without question, that is true. And the consolidation of spring training into the Valley of the Sun was probably one of the greatest, I don't even know how to say this word, factors, one of the greatest factors in causing that explosive growth, because once you no longer had trips to Yuma and to Palm Springs and to Tucson as a regular part of the Cactus League schedule, and instead you got 14 teams down here spread around a variety of venues around the Valley of the Sun. I complain about the fact that I have to drive 40 miles each way to a game, and it isn't a lot of fun, but boy, does it beat the hell out of being in Florida, where you can have 3-hour drives between stadiums easily when you go from one coast to the other.
Right, and, players get a bad rap for not wanting to go on these road trips in Florida for away games. He's a millionaire, billionaire, this, that, and the other thing. Hey, you sit on a bus for 3 hours that could break down in the heat and what have you. It is definitely better in Arizona. Definitely closer and as far as spring training. But I had this hunch about it because I'm talking to a good friend of mine who does the Yankee show in this network, and I think we were talking on the air about spring training. He lives in the Tampa St. Pete area. He gets to see his beloved Yankees, and he's describing prices of tickets and merchandise as if we're talking about big league ball.
Oh, absolutely.
$40 for a spring training game.
Ralph, the lawn seats in the outfield at Talking Stick, which is the second newest stadium down here. It's the one that is shared by the Diamondbacks and the Rockies. The lawn seats, unreserved, on about a 20-degree slope, are $23 per person. Surprise, which is a lovely little ballpark, but Surprise was not named because you drive until you can see the end of the world, and then surprise, there's a town there. It was actually named after the founder's birthplace in Nebraska. But Surprise, which is pretty far out. It's 12 miles further out Bell Road than the Peoria Stadium I was talking about. I walked in, and previously, to me, the most notable thing about Surprise was that it was the first place that I ever saw deep-fried Oreos for sale. However, they and it's a pretty
and they
little
sell it
ballpark,
as a health food, right? It's for vegans.
Well, it's for people who have to have chocolate. If you don't have to have chocolate, then they had deep-fried Twinkies. But but now, and this was just shocking to me when I walked in. Here, big signs on the concession stand: special combo deal. A turkey sandwich with 3 slices of processed turkey on some kind of soft roll, a 1-ounce bag of pretzel bites, and a 12-ounce soda. $17, and that's a special combo price. Purchased separately, they'd be more.
Oh my God! at a ballpark.
So you can understand why there's a line of cars a half a mile long to get in and out of Chick-fil-A right around the corner before the game.
Right. Where it's a different kind of torture. Eating it. You're eating crap and you're not at a ball game.
Well, actually, I mean, I'm not here to defend.
No, I know.
Practices or their politics, but I will tell you that the food at Chick-fil-A is not bad. They cook all their food in peanut oil, and we should all be so lucky to have our fried food in a monounsaturated fat like that in other places. And they cook it to order, and it's actually pretty good. I can't complain because you're
about
and you
just mentioned their politics, and they were lambasted not long ago, twice now, for contributing to anti-LBG causes.
Yeah. We've known all along that is true. They're not open on Sundays. They believe in observing the Sabbath. They come from they're family owned, and they come from a highly religious family. And the thing that I have to say about that is, while that may not be my choice, the people who go to work there know this before they go. And
true.
And some of them are able to separate one from the other, and others aren't. It's the big difference between them, I think, and a lot of other companies, Ralph, is that we know where they stand, and we don't know where everybody else stands. We don't know where people are putting their hidden PAC money. We just know that, for the most part, we can be pretty sure that people are, supporting themselves at all times. That's the nature of politics.
Very interesting what you say, because it equates to overt and covert prejudice. When people are covert, you have no idea where they stand vis-a-vis.
Right. The most dangerous guy is the guy who smiles while he's sliding the shiv in between your ribs.
Right, exactly. And give me overt anytime. At least I know where you're coming from. I can prepare my emotions. I can sometimes have to prepare my body to flee. But I'd rather know, but rather than the sneaky son of a bitch that's, as you say, is ready to get you. You just don't know when, and you don't even know where that he's ready to get you because of the covert nature. Perfectly said.
Right. I mean, how many times have we looked at a person who might feel a little bit unpleasant, and you've heard somebody say, well, at least you know where you stand with him.
Right.
And that's taken as a positive. So,
you got to play D. You got to play in this world. You got to have to defend yourself constantly from the world around you and the folks that with their craziness on all levels. Yep. It's not just corporate. It's not just baseball. It's just a changing life.
No,
changing
in fact,
world.
If you haven't spent much time on Twitter in the last day or two, the hot rage right now is you're supposed to go onto Google, and you're supposed to Google your birth date and the words Florida man. And then you're supposed to post Florida man.
Florida man. Okay.
Florida man. So in my case, I Googled August 19th, Florida man, and here's what came back and what I reported. Florida man, 88, burns raccoon alive for eating mangoes. and that's the whole thing, is that Florida men have been, written up for doing so many bizarre things that whatever day you pick, 3 or 4 wild things will come up. It's just absolutely hilarious.
I will check into that and bore you with I'll try to make a quick story about Florida and mangoes. My mother, bless her soul, spent the last 15, 20 years of her life in a, what do they call it, a settlement, a condominium in Florida with 800 other old, elderly women and 7 men.
Who were probably exhausted at the end of every day.
Every day. And these men they'd prance around because why? They were a hot commodity. They were alive.
Oh, hell yeah. They could fog a mirror.
Yes. And the women would flaunt over these men. Anyway, I'm trying to make it short. My mother had her first cousin / Uncle Sam, was a Jewish doctor from Brooklyn. He was the head of the heart department at Brooklyn Jewish Hospital, a man to be worshipped, even though he never cured a patient. He just, but you know how Jewish people are, they worship doctors. So Sam.
Oh yeah, my son is a doctor.
My son, who was it? It was my son, the nurse. I don't know if you remember. There was a comedy team that, for some reason.
No, I just remember my mother, the car.
My mother's the car. All right. So my mother has this cousin, and he lives at 100 Ocean Parkway in Brooklyn, a beautiful building. And one of his neighbors lives in Florida in the same condominium and would sit in the pool. He was a produce guy in New York. So here's the story that puts it all together. My mother says, this is a man lives at 100 Ocean Park. He knew Uncle Sam, Dr. Sam. He's alive. that was another thing. So
he checked all the boxes.
Right, and I remember this because it was yesterday. He says the subject got around for one reason or another to mangoes, and he says, just say, yeah, I had a nice mango the other day, and he goes, mangoes, everybody's sitting in the pool, and it's 100 degrees, and you sitting there. He goes, mangoes? You don't know from mangoes. My shop, my produce shop, we in Brooklyn, we had the best mangoes in the entire world. This guy goes off for about a half an hour on mangoes. And that's what I remember. And my mother's going, there's an expression in Yiddish. She says, "Sag nicht," which means say nothing to me. Because she knows that anything I say is going to be a smart-ass thing, because you couldn't help with that. Sag nicht, she says. It's one of my greatest memories. And every time the word mangoes is mentioned in my life, I go either to myself or to Tally. I go, mangoes, either out loud. I'm playing that.
Well,
this is 30 years later. I'm sure my mom's been.
You have reminded me of one of the few Jewish jokes that I can probably get away with telling on the air to a Jewish friend. And
well, no, you can say anything on a podcast radio.
And well, and it's not really a Jewish joke. It just happens to be that's the way I heard it. But so Mrs. Schwartz goes down to the corner bodega, and she asks the grocer there, she says, "Do you have bananas?" And he says, "Yes, we have bananas. They're $1 a pound." And she says, "Oh, we give out $1 a pound? For crying out loud! Schwartz around the corner has them for 25 cents." He says, "Then go around the corner and buy them from Schwartz for 25 cents." She says,
"Got no bananas."
She says, "He's got no bananas. He's out of bananas." And the guy says, "Yeah, well, when I'm out of bananas, they're 25 cents a pound here too."
That's beautiful. That's great. But you brought back memories with mangoes and Mom, and I'll tell you a quick baseball story about my mother. It'll be much faster. And the reason I thought of this was that Don Lawson's, something about Don Lawson, but I came home from school one day, and it was Don Lawson pitching the no-hitter, the perfect game, the last few days. I'm 10 years old. My mother tells me the story that in 1939, when Lou Gehrig gave that speech, she was there. She got what they called ducats in those days, and
yep.
she got to go to Lou Gehrig's speech. So I had to tie her into baseball to complete it, because I don't want to be accused of going off on a tangent and never coming back, like this show is based on, basically. So
you and I were joking about it off the air that we should probably just call it two farts wandering in the desert, two old farts at that.
Yes, and I might say we qualify that.
On all counts.
Yes. Sadly but happily, because not everybody makes it to be an old fart. And
it was always my goal, Ralph, to get to be old enough to celebrate birthdays again. I stopped celebrating at 21. I told them there's no point in celebrating again until you hit 65.
Right.
And I made it.
Yep. And that,
now.
What did Casey Stengel say? Not everybody does, and you can look it up.
Yeah, and the thing is, you get to a point in life where you just have to be thankful for the little things, like the fact that you can still complain.
Right. And the fact that we could pass on our wisdom a little bit, that's kind of nice. And not just our wisdom, our point of view. And we have the good memory that goes with it. A lot of people get old and they don't remember Jack. But
oh, God, I remember Jack. He used to go off with Arnie every weekend.
Yes, he did. Yes. What's paw for this hole? That's another old joke, another old Arnie and Jack joke that maybe only for podcast radio.
Okay.
But the dum-dum. Tell me what impresses you, and the audience must know, because you are what you are. You are a jack of all trades in the baseball world. What are some of the things you do besides official scoring for baseball?
Well, somebody has to run that dreaded clock that's on the scoreboard in all the stadiums to try to keep the game moving along, and so I do that. I also work for MLB.com, and I put the games on the web, pitch by pitch and play by play, the game day recreation. And when none of those things are happening, sometimes you'll find me up in the TV booth doing stats for the broadcasters.
Wow. What an eclectic way of putting little piles of money together and having it be not only your passion, but some could make a case they do it for free. How many people come up to you and say, whatever you paid, it doesn't matter, you're being paid. And there are X number of people sitting in those stands that, sitting at home, sitting anywhere, that would gladly do it voluntarily.
Well, as I always tell people, because you get especially in San Francisco, where people at head height can reach into the press box. It's wide open, and the windows are always open. And they'll always ask me, what do you do? And you tell them, and they'll tell you something like, boy, I'd give my right testicle to trade places with you. And I always tell them, I don't know what to do with the two that I've got. What am I going to do with the third one? Or those who say exactly what you say.
Yeah.
Or there are those that say exactly what you say, which is, I do it for free, to which my response was, not the second day you wouldn't.
No, because what they don't see is the logistical thing. Well, we were talking about driving around and what it takes to get there. And,
well, there's that, and there's the fact that, doing the game pitch by pitch on the web at a time when Major League Baseball is developing into the 21st century and working with enterprises whose sole function in life is to make money off legalized wagering. It's as high pressure and high stress a job as you can have. There are going to be proposition bets that may actually go from pitch to pitch, and so you have to be accurate, 100% accurate, no mistakes allowed, because it gets people's hopes up who are sitting in a sports book, and then you correct something into something else, and they feel you've taken money out of their pocket. So it's a high stress job. Same
okay,
with scoring, same
let's review a second. Baseball is in cahoots with legalized gambling.
I work for the commissioner's office. Wait. I work for the commissioner's office. I will not even participate in the word cahoots. Baseball has a business relationship. They have a business relationship.
Okay. So baseball has a business relationship with gambling. Back for years, owners have gambled at the racetrack. They've owned horses. They've owned racetracks for crying out loud. I think Del Webb had something to do with racing back then, to say nothing of development in Arizona, particularly. But and Pete Rose is out of baseball. Is there something hypocritical about it all, or am I missing it?
Let me tell you what the policy is, and I believe this is public knowledge. The policy for employees of baseball. That includes me. That includes the vice president of communications for the Giants. That includes the director of scouting for the Oakland A's. That includes Steinbrenner's son. The policy is baseball-wide. It is not illegal for us to engage in legal wagering on other sports. It is expressly prohibited that we not only don't engage in wagering on baseball, we basically can't even really talk about it because we're considered to have inside information.
Okay.
And, if Pete was Dick Allen and had said, if the horse can't eat it, I won't play on it, that's one thing. But if Dick Allen had decided to bet on his White Sox or Dodgers, that would have been a whole different world, because that goes to the integrity of the game itself. And nothing is more sacred than the integrity of the game. And I'll tell you what, even those companies that are publicly traded that make their money from wagering will tell you the same thing. The integrity of the game is paramount, or people won't do the activity that brings them their revenue.
I think that's what's killing horse racing. Is the fact that they lost integrity.
Yeah, I don't know. At one time, horse racing was the most popular spectator sport in America. More people bought tickets to see horse racing than any other sport.
Whoa, I didn't know that.
But once off track, well, yeah, because because it was going on in a lot of places at the same time.
Right.
You know, but once off-track betting became a thing, people stopped going to the track.
That's what killed it. All right, Michael, time to talk about impending rule changes, experimentation. Some have gone into force. Where do you want to start on this? What would come when I say impending rule changes per se? What comes into your mind first?
I guess the one that I think is going to have the most impact that most people aren't thinking about very much is the addition of a 26th player to the roster next year.
Okay.
26th
player?
Yes. Okay. Yes, and for doubleheaders, they'll have an optional 27th player for day-night doubleheaders who can be brought up and swapped onto the team for one game and back off of it for the second game, which basically gives them the ability to have some pitching coverage. But it's going to be combined with some kind of limit on the number of pitchers allowed on the roster. We don't know what that is yet. That's going to be, God help us, studied by a committee in baseball made up of baseball people and union people. And you know, if you stop to consider that the commissioner's Blue Ribbon Committee still hasn't delivered an opinion on what should be happening with the Oakland Athletic Stadium, who knows when that rule will finally be going into effect. But let's assume that next year. By both limiting the number of pitchers on a roster and adding a 26th player to the roster, I think the union will most likely, and this is just me spitballing here, I think that the union will most likely drop its agitation for a universal DH, and I think that's going to inure to the benefit of the National League fans and baseball fans everywhere, because I think having a universal DH would dramatically change, if not almost eliminate, strategy from the game.
Okay. What about...
So that's the first one that comes to mind. Everybody wants to talk about the 3-batter limit for relief pitchers. And that's a simplistic way of looking at that rule. It's a 3-batter limit if you come in and... let's put it this way. You're going to face 3 batters if you're not very effective, because if you're one of those situational guys and you're brought in with 1 out and 2 guys on, obviously your goal is to get the double play and get out of the inning. And if you do, even though you only faced 1 guy, you got 2 outs and the inning ended. And when the inning ends, so does your requirement to stay in for 3 batters. You have to stay in for 3 batters or until the end of the inning. Now, if you come back to start the next inning, that's only 2 batters, and you still have to stay in for a 3rd one then. But if you end an inning and you can come out of the game without having to face those 3 batters. And realistically, in some ways, this takes the game back to the 1960s, when there weren't specialty relievers. There were just guys who came in and gave you an inning or 2. How many 2-inning saves did Goose Gossage get? How many 2-inning saves did Bruce Sutter get? I mean,
right.
Tons of them. You know,
yeah,
so
Raleigh Fingers is an example. When they close out a game, it would be
saves.
Sometimes 2-3 innings.
Yeah, exactly. So it's not like we haven't seen this before. And there's already, you know, this isn't a massive rule change in the sense that there's already a rule on the books that says if you bring a pitcher in, he has to face a batter. You can't take him out if they bring up a pinch hitter.
Right. Yes, indeed.
So all we're doing is extending, that by a couple of hitters, and he's not particularly effective, and you bring him in to start the inning. So really, this is where this is going to have an effect is, if you know, you're going to have to decide if you're going into the 8th inning and you're facing 3, 4, 5 in the other lineup and they go left, right, left, you're going to have to decide: do I want my guy facing a righty in the middle, or do I want to hold him out to get the last guy?
And I'm sure in terms of constructing a roster, these left-handed specialists will kind of go out of vogue. You'd look for a pitcher who could get both left-handed and right-handed pitchers out.
Well, and you know what? It's not that big a deal. I mean, everybody points to Javi Lopez as the homegrown example. Here's a guy who was the ultimate loogie, the ultimate left-handed one-out guy. And actually, he wasn't. If you look at how he was used, even by the Giants, he pitched complete innings frequently. If you go back and look at his numbers, you'll see 43 appearances, 38 innings. You don't get there by getting one out per appearance. And they were, he and Jeremy Affeldt, these guys were fully capable of pitching an inning. They had more than one pitch. And what you're going to see is that there's going to be a sudden, I think, a sudden influx of lefties who can throw a changeup. Most of these guys have been throwing frisbee sliders and fastballs. And, you get a crossfire pitch that looks like it's coming from behind a left-hander, and then it darts out over the plate, and you're off balance, and you're reaching for it, and you're fishing for it, and if you hit it, you flip a little bloop to the third baseman. But, to right-handers, that's coming right into their wheelhouse. You can't throw that pitch to them. But you can throw a changeup effectively as a left-hander and get right-handers out. And so that's what's going to happen, I think, is that these guys are just going to develop another pitch. It's not like they can't throw other pitches. It's that they haven't had to.
Right. Michael, off the subject a bit, but on the subject of relief pitchers, have you noticed that I'm a fantasy baseball guy. I've got a fantasy team and all that. It's almost impossible to tout a relief pitcher from year to year. Excuse the gambling expression. But do you find that to be true? And is there some reason why for the inconsistency?
Well, I don't think that it's necessarily because guys aren't able to do it from year to year nearly as much as it's you find a guy and he has a really good year for you, and now he wants to triple his income, and the mindset of management, which is not unreasonable based on the facts, is, hey, we found this guy, we can find another one cheap. Because the game is being driven more and more by statistical analysis. And I don't know if you remember this, but 20 years ago, Bill James, the father of statistical analysis, said it doesn't matter who your closer is. It literally doesn't matter. Across all of baseball, the final pitcher in the game with a lead wins 93% of the time. The best closer wins 96% of the time. So the 3% difference over the course of a year is plus or minus 2 wins.
And then there's the idea of, do you use your best pitcher situationally?
Well, that's the other thing that he has always advocated, which is, if you've got a 5-4 lead in the 7th inning and the heart of the order is coming up against you, that's the inning you have to tamp down. That's the inning where you should use your quote-unquote closer.
Or there ain't no ninth inning to talk about.
Well, there is that, but the flip side of that is, and if you ask Bruce Bochy or anyone else who's known for managing a bullpen effectively, one of the things that they're going to tell you is, well, your guys need to know mentally when to start preparing to get in the game, when to start looking at the lineup, when to go out and start stretching, when to go out and start throwing. And if I use you in the 9th inning today and the 7th inning tomorrow, you're probably not going to be ready in the 7th inning.
Well, right there, that is the basic difference between managing old school managing and managing strictly by the numbers. You got to have
and I don't know anybody who manages strictly by the numbers. I know people who are informed by the numbers to help them make difficult decisions, but I don't know anybody who, pulls out the computer and looks at the chart to say, oh, gee, I should have Pedro Baez warming up now, and because I need Kenley Jansen in the eighth inning instead of the ninth. That's just, nobody does that.
Okay. Yet it is the first thing that a manager thinks about, as opposed to there are no such thing as a hunch anymore, and there is no. I think it's a diminished practice of looking the player in the eye and seeing how does he feel today? How you doing today? Like, your numbers are only as good as if your kid kept you awake all night the night before.
Right. You
know what I'm saying?
And
how a player comes to that game, that's got to affect the statistics more than is he a left-handed batter, is he a right-handed batter? That kind of thing.
Well, we've known this for a long time, Ralph. We've also known that there are situations where when the game is over, you go, well, why didn't you go to Busenfratz out there at that point in the game when you got to him every other time you face this guy, And the answer comes back, well, he wasn't available tonight. See, you don't announce that in advance. You don't tell the other team that your guy can't get up. You might even have him warm up loosely if he's not available just to act as a decoy. There's a lot of stuff that's going on out there that isn't immediately obvious to the casual observer. Sometimes you get a guy out there to warm up that can't go in the game, but you do it just to make sure that a certain pinch hitter doesn't get employed in the game. I mean, there's stuff that goes on all the time. But at the same point in time, I am not a fan of this notion that because across baseball, batting averages against a pitcher go up the third time through the lineup, therefore nobody should be allowed to face the lineup for a third time. I'm here to tell you that the Los Angeles Dodgers would be the world champions if Rich Hill was left in a game.
All right. The final question about rule changes, and this is something that is being experimented with in the Atlantic League, which is an independent league back east, obviously, and the most famous team to come out of that league was the Long Island Ducks for one reason or another. But they're experimenting with two things, that maybe even three, that are very important. One of them is they're going to move back the mound a couple of feet. And
no, they aren't. I'll explain to you what they are going to do, but go ahead.
Now, why don't you explain that first?
Well, they're going to move the rubber. They're not going to move the mound. And they're going to move the rubber back 18 inches, not 2 feet. And I will be as interested as anybody on the planet to see how that works, because I simply do not understand how you ask a pitcher who has maybe 800,000 to 1 million reps on his arm for muscle memory, how you ask him, oh, by the way, we're going to add 18 inches to your throw. Please try to make your breaking ball strikes again. I don't know how you do that. Plus, you're going to see a lot more contact, I think, because in that 18 inches, a 93-mile-an-hour fastball out of the hand arrives at the plate ordinarily at about 87 miles an hour. Now it's going to be 85. And that is a huge difference.
Absolutely. So if they're trying to get offense up, pick up offense,
they're not.
Probably succeed.
They're not.
Because, but if they're trying to avoid injuries in pitchers, can you imagine you tweak this and that for when the mound.
Well, let's start from the first premise here, Ralph. The first premise is that these changes are all part of a process of trying to improve the pace of play. And the pace of play is negatively affected more than anything else by foul balls. And every foul ball costs you about 35 to 40 seconds of game time. You have it hit. You have a fielder go chase it. It lands in the stands. He has to turn around and walk back to his position. The pitcher gets a new ball. If the umpire has them, if he doesn't, he has to ask for new balls, and then the pitcher gets a new ball, and then he stands on the mound and rubs it up for 10 to 15 seconds, and then he gets back on the mound and looks in for his sign. And it happens on every foul ball because you get a new ball with every foul ball because we throw them away now. So that's the biggest factor. That's the closest correlator. I have actually tracked that over the course of a couple of years, and the correlation coefficient for the stats geeks out there is about 0.96 to 97 of as the number of foul balls go up, the time a game goes up with them. So how do you get foul balls out of the game? Well, you have to ask yourself, why are there 15% more foul balls now than there were when the Giants won their first World Series in 2010? And the answer is an unlimited parade of flamethrowers coming into the game. You know, you bring in a reliever, and as soon as he's done, you bring in another reliever, and the first one throws 97, and the second one throws 99, and the third one throws 101. And as a hitter, in order for you to time those pitches, you have to swing at those pitches. And when you swing at those pitches, if you're good, you fight them off, and you hit foul balls. And you hit a lot of foul balls. And here's another thing that happens because of that. The faster that pitch is, usually speaking, the lower the angle that it comes off your bat as a foul ball, which increases the likelihood of the catcher taking one in the mush. I have advocated for years, and I can't get anybody to even give me the time of day. I have advocated for years that catchers should be required to move back 18 inches from where they currently set up. They used to be back there. Yogi was back there. Bill Dickey was back there. These guys made the Hall of Fame back there. If you move back 12 to 18 inches, the foul balls that currently hit you right in the forehead on the mask and jar the brain the most,
right,
will now hit the top of your helmet and glance off.
Whoa.
So
you are as every bit as much a scientist as a stat man.
Well, it's a very, it's a very scientific game. It's a game of geometry. It's a game of vectors. I mean, if you understand a little bit about science, you understand what an amazement it is for somebody to just barrel up a ball and just nut it out into the gap, out into the alley. And you watch an outfielder, the minute you turn around, you avert your gaze to the outfield, you already seeing the guy's name and number. He's already got his back to you, and he's running to where the ball is going to be. Now, how does he do that calculation that fast? You stop and think about all the vectors involved, the pitch speed, the pitch spin, where it hits the bat, the center of percussion on the bat, the amount of spin that he's putting on it. Is it backspin? Is it topspin? What effect is the wind going to have? What effect is the size of the crowd going to have? Because I can tell you, at a place like Candlestick, I watched in the 1987 playoffs against the Cardinals, I watched Jeffrey Leonard hit a ball that literally scraped the back of the top of the fence in left field, and I was standing right next to that fence looking along it, and I saw the ball skip in the air when a huge roar came out of the crowd. It puts a burst of hot air out there that's just enough to change the flight of the ball, and it was just enough to get it over the fence. These things happen, and they happen in an eye blink, and the great outfielders are able to make those calculations. You know, same thing. You throw a football spiral 60 yards. Well, is it instinctively or is it practice?
That's a very good question.
I think it's practice that becomes instinct. I don't think Willie Mays was born with the instinct to know which way to shift his weight in advance on a changeup. And Willie could see the catcher's signs from most stadiums, and when he couldn't, he had them relayed to him, so he knew which way to lean because he knew the opposing hitters so well. He knew that Ernie Banks was going to do such and such with an inside slider and such with an outside slider.
Hey, was there a time when he was calling pitches? I think Dark had him.
Yes, there was.
Okay. This was, and you and I never seem to forget, it always comes back to Willie. This was a rare treat as a baseball fan. Ain't nobody.
Yeah, I mean, my first life memory, I think we've discussed this before, was watching the catch on television in 1954. I mean, that is literally my earliest memory. And you know, I had the unmitigated joy of being able to watch the vast bulk of Willie's career.
Yes, and I had the unmitigated joy to watch him as I was the 5-year-old, and this was in 1951, and I saw the joy that it brought to my grandfather, his play brought to my grandfather, who's a man, obviously, the years he grew up, there was nothing like a joy. DiMaggio didn't have a smile on his face. He didn't light up the stadium in the same way that Willie did. And,
and Joe D was a very, very private man. He was very shy. He was camera shy. He was shy of the crowds. I got to meet him once or twice back when he was working with the A's long after he had retired, and he was shy and circumspect then.
Right.
And he was already Mr. Coffee, and yet he was still, you know, I can only imagine that he must have told him to just empty the set when we're filming this. I only want a director and a camera person there.
Wow. Good memories, my friend. Thank you. This was a terrific show. We'll do some of the other rule changes next week. Some of them do make sense. I'll ask you, though, rules are, as an old libertarian speaking, you could put in laws, but if you can't enforce the laws, you count to 20 seconds. Are umpires enforcing that?
Well, the pitch clock has been removed from consideration for at least a while, but no, I thought, I'm not going to express an opinion on that because it's still open and my job is to help enforce that. But I will tell you that Sean Doolittle, whom I follow on Twitter, within, I think, 3 minutes of the announcement coming out that the pitch clock was being suspended for the time being, he came out and pointed out the immediate flaw in it. He said, took guys about 2 pitches to figure out that the clock started over if they stepped off the rubber, which was only true if there were men on base. If there was nobody on base, the clock did not restart. But nevertheless, it turns out that it did stop as soon as you came set. And so you had guys like Corey Guerin, who Giants fans are very familiar with, who would come set, and then it hold for what seemed like 3 or 4 seconds, and then look up at the sky for another 3 or 4 seconds, and then look back at the third baseman for 2 or 3 more seconds before going into his pitching motion. I can only imagine, because I know Corey, and I know him to be a very, very, very smart and thoughtful guy, I can only imagine that he was going through some sort of visualization exercise to do that. But from outside of him, all you saw was delay. And the clock had no effect on that because he was in the set position, so it had already been turned off.
Whoa. So they can, and any rule could be gotten around.
Anything that man can devise, man can circumvent.
Okay.
I think it was Friedrich Engel who said that, but I'm not sure. That's certainly not a literal. That's certainly not a literal quote. It's a paraphrase, but I know that somebody with a lot better philosophical chops than I has said that.
Well, I can't think of many with a better philosophical mind than yours, my friend. Thank you for another great show. It's the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. Michael Duca, it's a pleasure.
Pleasure's always mine, Ralph. Thank you for the opportunity.
You be well, my friend, and thank you for listening, everyone. I will just tell you how great it is for me. This was terrific. Adios. We'll be back at you before you know it. The proceeding was a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production. Thank you for listening.